So it is now recording, and I'm going to go back to the slideshow. There we go. All right. I think
before you begin, maybe we should have everybody mute before you begin so that there aren't interruptions.
Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe Carrie, you can just mute them.
Great, I'll go ahead and mute them, and I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves at this point, and we'll make sure Lynn can talk.
Yeah.
So, and you can also like raise your hand. There's a little button for reactions on the bottom. If you want to say something, you can raise your hand, and I'll let Lynn say whatever else she wants to say.
Yeah. So I did intend that this would be kind of a talk / dialogue / discussion. And so originally I thought, oh, I would just have a very few little slides. And then I got kind of more excited and put in more slides. But the way this is going to work is we have, oh, and why is it not progressing? Next. Okay. So these are the sections that will be in tonight's talk. And when I get to, so I'll kind of say some things about each section. And when I get to the end of that section, if you have comments or questions that you want to make about that section, then I'll kind of invite that at the end of each section. So if you'll kind of hold it to those little stopping points, that'll be great. That'll help me stay focused with what I'm trying to share. And if you do ask a question about one of the later sections, I will probably say that to you. Oh, that's in the next section, and then, or later section, and ask you to hold your thoughts till then. So hope that makes sense. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the similarities and differences between the current crisis and the climate disruption. And as you can see in the little white words above, it says, buckle up. This is the difficult section of this talk. So as we already know, the situation with the virus is pretty catastrophic in a whole lot of ways. And if you're on this call, you already know that climate change is also pretty catastrophic. So the part we're going to visit right now is the not happy part of this talk. After that, we will go on to some things that I think will be more inspiring. So as we know, with the pandemic, we're starting with a health crisis. It is leading to economic disruption, which is leading to economic depression. This is leading to massive unemployment and failure of small businesses. The newspapers were reporting just today, 50 million Americans applied for unemployment in just the month of March, and that the loans that were available for small businesses under the stimulus package are already all been assigned, and there are no more available. And then this is leading to loss of housing for many. There is enough food and toilet paper, but distribution systems are starting to break down. And we'll be talking a little bit later about why distribution is really the problem for food. And then we have disruption of the education system, a horrific rise of domestic violence around the world of every kind, and then complete failure of safety nets, at least in the US, no provision for the displaced, homeless, newly unemployed, or domestic violence victims. And all of this is leading to an increase in depression and other mental health problems as a result. So that's kind of the situation with that. So I've kind of broken climate change into disruption that we're already experiencing and then disruption that's anticipated. So already we have been experiencing now for a number of years increased forest fires that can result in housing losses, increased hurricanes and flooding, which both of which affect specific communities and can lead to loss of housing. And then drought or flooding affecting farm failures and food shortages, increased air pollution resulting in increased asthma and other health problems, species loss from rising temperatures. We're seeing the salmon, orca, and butterflies affected, and melting glaciers. One of the things that we expect more of is displacement and refugees. Sea level rise causing major coastal cities to become uninhabitable, causing displacement of 300 million people by 2050 is the prediction. Other types of climate caused displacements, floods, droughts, hurricanes, sometimes forest fires. In 2017, 18 million people were displaced by natural disasters, the vast majority of which were caused or exacerbated by climate disaster. In 2019, 83,000 climate refugees went to Europe. An Australian think tank rates 100 billion people to live in high or very high risk areas for climate exposure. So the question really is, would we like this to happen with pre-planning and intention, or by emergency displacements, which is what we're seeing now? So food system disruptions. Heat will lead to increasing drought, killing crops and livestock. Many plants no longer can flourish in the zone that they commonly grow in. Weather changes result in disruptions to growing seasons. Much of the world eats seafood, which will die off if water is too hot. And all of this leads to food shortages already commonly happening in Africa. Health effects. Some people dying from extreme heat, increased respiratory difficulties from increased air pollution, and tropical diseases will spread as areas warm. Some of this in all of the categories really is very subtle. It's things people don't necessarily take in. So for example, the climate changes that we're experiencing is resulting in more intense pollen levels. And so then for people who have allergies, they are experiencing worse and worse allergy seasons. And so things like that happen without people even recognizing it to be an effect of climate change. So the main difference that I would say between the pandemic and climate change is in time and place. Climate change is likely to create pockets of disaster, already has been, which then lead to displaced people without resources. And it's possible to pre-plan for this. COVID-19 caused worldwide effect with no time for planning. So kind of a pretty dramatic difference in terms of how quickly we experience the effects. And if you think about the boiling frog syndrome, you know, we've kind of had boiling frog with climate change and not with COVID. Everybody's very aware of COVID because of how quickly it came on. And then I say upside down economic impact, by which I mean the economic impacts of the two are actually quite different, although both will be bad. Climate change in its slower spread would conceivably allow unaffected communities to provide economic stability or resources to affected areas where housing and job loss happens. COVID-19 affected some industries completely, and others, like the restaurant industry, others saw a huge expansion of needs for their services like delivery. Most not the same, most of those affected are not the same as what we would anticipate being affected under climate change. Climate change would not increase Amazon delivery services or it wouldn't disadvantage restaurants, entertainment, education, etc. Both will affect healthcare. climate change much more likely to affect farmers, fisheries, and food chain. It will increase the need for emergency services and relocation services. And then the social isolation aspect. The separation and isolation that people are experiencing now is the opposite of what they will experience under climate change, where we can come together shoulder to shoulder to fight the problem, use art, music, rallies, speeches, and marches as ways of organizing. And I think that this is something that many activists are finding particularly challenging about this current situation. We're kind of, as a species, hardwired to come to each other's aid in moments of crisis, and we're not really being able to do that right now, not in the way we'd like to. So before we go on to the silver lining section of this, I want to see if there are people who have questions or comments that they want to make about that comparison section that we just did, the comparisons I was making between climate change and the pandemic. So you can, Wayne's raising his hand. Wayne, unmute, please. Can you unmute?
Okay, am I on? I
Yeah.
hope so. That was quite a mouthful of everything you covered. Wow, I'm still writing and a ways behind. So good summary. Forgot what I was going to say now. One big difference, I think, is that that to add in there, I don't think you mentioned it, but the thought of the pandemic will be over at some point. It may be totally destructive, but climate change isn't until we arrest it.
Yeah.
It'll just keep on going and getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. That is actually one of the things that I've written about in the TCAT newsletter, is just this idea that this is kind of a dress rehearsal, as far as I'm concerned, for climate change. We know the pandemic will end. Every pandemic in history has ended. Whereas by the time climate change gets to be as bad as what we're experiencing now, it will be unreversible. And so that, to me, is a really big call out of this experience for us to work hard on doing preventative things about climate change right now, so that we don't wind up in this situation of permanent fate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that Carrie can see everyone, because I can only see about 4 people right now. Are you able to see who may have their hand up, Carrie?
I am able to see that. Did anybody else want to say something?
Sure.
Barack, Barack.
So, yeah, I mean, Lynn, you and maybe Carrie know what I've done recently in outreach to high school teachers, but I made some comparisons between COVID and virus and climate change, and really focused it on kind of different categories of comparison, more on how we go about stopping and addressing both of the issues.
Yeah.
And the comparison I made,
which we will be talking. We will be talking about how we stop it in the later part.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This
so
is
let me mention a couple other comparisons that I've thought of and that I've shared with teachers, and that is that we have got to finally appreciate that listening to the scientists and heeding their warnings. Yeah. Because this is the kind of catastrophe that happens when we don't listen to the scientists. Yep. And the other thing is that we have got to appreciate that we're all in this together, and we've got to take care of each other. We can't just be our country first. We have to, you know, we are not separate from other people, other countries. So
yep.
Those things I think are.
I think you're kind of going a little into silver linings, which is our next thing. So I think I will go ahead and go into these. And
actually, before you move on, Lynn, I wanted to mention that Helen had wrote in the chat too that, and some other people might have noticed that you cited a study saying 100 billion people were at risk, and it's probably 1 billion because the world population is less than 8 billion. But I was wondering if you could just, you know, because that was a lot of information that you just gave, which I thought was really excellent. But could you just like, what are the key comparisons we have? Like, what are the highest similarities between the coronavirus and what we could possibly experience with climate change?
I think that the highest comparison is actually the disruption to the economy, which I feel will happen for completely different reasons. Well, not completely, but very different reasons. Under climate change, the disruption to the economy will happen more from displacement and also from food shortages. Whereas here it's happened from a work stoppage, which is of course a coping mechanism that we're doing. Yeah, Helen's got her hand up. Can you unmute? There.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what the raising your hand is, so thumbs up, Lynn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, I think maybe it's worth like one more comparison that is in line with your disruption is the disruption of governance.
Yeah.
Which I am really noticing. I mean, the first thing I had to do was push the Port of Olympia back into holding regular meetings because they thought they didn't have to.
Right.
And we have the President of the United States thinking that, you know, he can shut down Congress. And
right.
You know, there's a real lack of resilience in structures of governance. That I think is really important.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I would really agree with you. I mean, we see this sort of tipping towards more fascistic things under this current crisis, and one theory about why there's been sort of a rise towards fascism in the last decade or so is that as people experience the kind of scary things that are coming with climate change, that they're looking for a strong man leader. And so then we get ourselves into this problem. So anyway, yeah, that was a good point, Helen. Thank you for making that. All right, I'm going to go into this next.
You want to take one more? Go ahead. I see Wayne has his hand up.
I have another thought, a difference, but also a bit of a comparison in terms of the scientists and the models. That the models for the COVIDs have been pretty good, but lacking a lot of data. And so you saw that some of the differences of the different models and far out, but generally they cover the territory. By comparison, that climate change models really are good. Yeah. And in terms of the main items, that those are pretty well documented, and really the only big thing we don't know going into the models are what our emissions will be between now and whenever, how we will react. So so climate change models are more mature, and so the results are, well, that part of it also is how bad it's going to be. We can get a pretty good handle on it, other than saying at what point the tipping points will be.
Yeah, I think that actually goes into one of my silver linings. So I will just say, as I go into silver linings here, that do not confuse silver linings for, oh, this makes it okay that we're having a pandemic. I do not intend to imply that in any way. I just think it's always useful to look for silver linings. So this picture, you can see the same historic landmark in India in both of these pictures, but one of them is from before the pandemic, and you can see the smog and the pollution. And then the other one is since then, which is why the guy is wearing a face mask. And so we are having reports that the reduction in greenhouse gases worldwide is expected to bring down pollution levels by 5% for the year, which is really a very, that may not sound like a lot to some people, but that's actually a really large amount. And when we work to try to achieve reductions, like, you know, that would be a wonderful thing to achieve that kind of reduction on a normal basis. The universal nature of the problem has punctured our ability to tune out global threat. So this is a map that's probably very familiar to a lot of you right now, showing where the pandemic is and this sort of thing. And you know, the fact that it's just really everywhere, I mean, it didn't start out everywhere, but it very quickly became everywhere, has, I think, highlighted to people how connected we are to each other, because of course travels between people was part of how it spread. And so it just shows all the multitude of ways we're connected to each other. But like so many other climate disasters that we've already had, you know, there's a hurricane and it affects maybe a small island country, and we can turn our eyes away and we can just sort of say, oh, well, you know, that's not my neighbor. But in this case, nobody can turn their eyes away. We're all having to look. And so I think that in the long run, that's going to help us think better about the climate situation, to be aware of our global connections to each other. We do have
Lynn?
Hey, Lynn, I'm getting some feedback that people can't see your pictures. I can see it on mine, but Carolyn wrote that there are no pictures that you were showing us.
None on mine either.
And Wayne's saying that as well.
I have no idea.
I can see her slides.
I can't. I see her.
I can't.
Nope.
It's possible. Did you click away from the Zoom meeting at all by chance?
No.
No. That's very mysterious why suddenly some of you would see it and some of you wouldn't.
If I can interject, I'm pretty sure that there's a speaker view option, and that will bring you to Lynn Fitz-Hugh's screen.
And what does that mean? Are you saying that they have to be on the speaker view to be able to see me?
I think possibly.
Okay.
I clicked on speaker view and I see a postage stamp size picture of Phoenix Rising.
I'm gonna let me ask something. For those of you who can't see, is it possible that you have the screen, maximized and that you've slipped away from it? Because sometimes I've lost things when I've got things in full screen. Like on a Mac, I can slide back and forth, but there's different options for different people.
I have you on full screen, so I see you as full image, and then I have half of the participants over on the right side in the small postage stamp size.
But you're not seeing the pictures?
None at all. Didn't see any at all.
Lynn, maybe stop full screen. Start again, Lynn.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that. Okay, that didn't work. All right, now. Just here.
Wayne, did you see them earlier? The pictures?
No, I've not seen any pictures. Only of the participants.
Oh, you mean the whole time you haven't seen it?
The whole time.
Oh, for heaven's sake!
And I've been waving my hand.
Huh.
I can see it, Lynn.
Now.
I can see it now.
Okay, I think, Wayne, you have yours set on something that's not allowing you to see it.
I can see it now.
Oh, you can see it now. Great.
Right, it just popped on just now, just a couple seconds ago. Whatever you did.
Okay, well, I just stopped it and started over again.
Is there anyone who still cannot see the images?
Okay, I think we fixed that. Hallelujah. So I'm gonna go.
Chat function to let us know, because it's hard to tell if people just have a question or if what's going on. So appreciate using that chat function there.
Yeah. Okay, so I was talking about silver linings, and one of them is certainly a chance to rebuild a more just society. So we basically have everything in rubble right now. All kinds of disparities and holes and failings have been revealed by what's going on. And so while there's no guarantee that we will do this, there is the opportunity, and I consider that a silver lining. Okay. It has also really laid bare class differences. It has become abundantly clear during this crisis that working class people are providing essential services, most of the essential services that our society is relying upon, and yet are not receiving adequate pay, not receiving adequate health care, don't have sick leave, etc. So. All right, so that was my section on silver linings, but I'm going to pause for a minute here and see if anybody has a silver lining that they want to mention. Yes, Helen.
My silver lining is that it has probably bankrupted a lot of frackers. So it's causing a, I mean, we knew that the change to the petrol, the fossil fuel industry was going to happen, but it has certainly accelerated it. I mean, that's both scary and a silver lining. I think it's very scary because, like, right now, there are ships floating around in the ocean holding oil that has nowhere, that has nowhere to go. And it's also scary because of the threat of these becoming abandoned assets and a pollution threat, and of course the economic disruption. But the plus side is that for investors, they're seeing very clearly that further investment in fossil fuels is not the way to go, or at least I hope so. The banks seem to be bailing the frackers out right now, but we'll see.
Yeah, that could become a situation like nuclear power, where after 3 Mile Island and the Russian meltdown, investors didn't want to invest in the building of new nuclear power plants. So great point, Helen.
Lynn, this is Marilyn, and I don't have a picture, so I can't raise my hand. But I just wanted to kind of go back to Helen's other point about focus on governance, and to say that I think there's a dramatic spotlight on the value of good governance, because we are seeing across the whole world examples of the disastrous impact of weak governance and tyranny, and the positive impact on ordinary people of good governance and just governance.
Yeah.
So I think it's very dramatic and very, very clear, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Good point. I was just looking at a map today of the pandemic that was a little different than the familiar one that we've all seen that I had up. It was per capita cases in the United States. And boy, you could have overlaid that with the map of which governors made stay-at-home orders early versus the ones who waited till the very end or still haven't. And it just would overlay perfectly in terms of amount of cases and resulting deaths. So I think that is going to be shining a very bright light on the good governance, as Marilyn was pointing out. Okay. Yes.
I have one maybe to burst a bubble on silver lining. Another comment you'd mentioned about 5% per year in terms of reduction of carbon emissions. I've been looking at all the articles this, and also comparing that to.
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, because we're actually going to come to the article that's about, and we're going to talk about it more. So can you?
And before you move on, Lynn, Lisa's been trying to say something for quite a while, so I'd love to give her a chance.
Okay, good, Lisa.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to say that a silver lining is about education. I listened to a public radio show called On Point yesterday, and it was devoted to how educators are, because they're having to do online learning now, how they're learning so much about what really works with kids. And the two teachers who were interviewed had written an op-ed for an Atlanta newspaper. And they said that there is more awareness now of, sorry, got the sun behind me, the need to emphasize critical thinking and creativity over quantitative measurements, you know, teaching to the test. And so there are a lot, and they had other educators on too, where, you know, superintendents of school systems, where they're just totally revamping, and that these changes are going to hold even when kids return to on-site schools. And I thought that was just really fantastic. They talked about also how in colleges they're changing from a grading system to pass-fail.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of lessen the feeling of competitiveness, which has driven so much anxiety and depression for kids throughout the country, to more of just get in there and learn and do the best you can and discover your own way of learning. And so I think that is a silver lining. Really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And you're actually reminding me of another silver lining, which I had been intending to put in here, which has to do with telecommuting. You know, so many employees have longed for and sort of wanted more opportunities for telecommuting, and a lot of employers have been very slow to even explore the idea, or have been sort of classist about, you know, we're only going to let our top employees telecommute. We're not going to let the other employees that could telecommute do so. And so now employers have been forced to figure out how to really make telecommuting work. And as all of us here, we've all learned how to use Zoom. And my guess is that we're going to have much higher telecommuting rates after this, which of course is climate friendly. So, yeah.
And before you move on, Lynn, I just wanted to share a couple of things. What somebody mentioned, how this virus is really actually helping people to come together in a new way. And Kaylee from Olympia High School mentioned that they're still doing grading there, but a lot of schools are switching. And I'd like to make a request of the participants, if you could wait until I call on you. That way people who are raising their hands and waiting to be called on can have a chance to speak. That would be really helpful. Obviously, if you're not on camera, you might need to just jump in because we can't see you. But for those of you on video, that'd be real helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Carrie, for playing that role, because in order to have my the PowerPoint showing, I actually can't see more than about 3 people, so I really can't see who has their hands up. So I'm really happy that Carrie's playing this role with me. All right, we're going to go into what can we learn from COVID. So we've been talking about silver linings, but
Lynn, I'm sorry to interrupt for just a moment. Carolyn has been trying to say something.
Ah, okay. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I've been trying to raise my hand, but I can't find a way to put the little hand icon up. I wanted just to say that part of the silver lining for me comes every day in the middle of floods of emails, when so many people and so many groups and so many networks are doing creative things. And I think that's what's going to create our new world, is that everybody's going to do what they can do to make things different than they've been. And I just see so much of that happening right now in all these emails.
Yeah, thank you. If there's anybody else who doesn't know how to use the hand icon, if you physically raise your hand, Carrie will be able to see that as well. So, okay, so I'm going to go on to
something real quick, Phyllis, because I know Lynn is ready to move on.
Well, I've just come to the conclusion how much time I am saving from driving to and from meetings. I mean, I've got so much more time in my day. I just can't even believe it. So
I can believe it, because you go to more meetings than anyone else I know, Phyllis.
This is my third Zoom meeting today, and otherwise I'd be in and out of Olympia. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, good. We're glad that it's working. Okay, I'm going to go on to what can we learn from COVID. So first thing, our health system must be transformed completely. The U.S. health system is not the best in the world. Having it attached to employment is a disaster, as we're seeing all these unemployed people now losing their health insurance during the middle of the biggest health crisis of our lifetimes. So universal single payer healthcare is the only thing that makes sense now. That for me is a big learning in this whole thing. And then the anti-science bias is wrong, dead wrong. So the Trump administration and the Republican Party has been for several decades ignored what science has to say about climate, has made up their own facts. They tried to do the same thing with this epidemic, trying to say that it was just a flu bug, as if saying it would make it true. But it is just nakedly clear right now that science remains true, whether you believe in it or not. Also reveals our food distribution system is nuts. Why is there no toilet paper? Well, food travels 1,500 miles from field to table, so does toilet paper. Distribution systems for restaurants and groceries are not the same. 40% of meals eaten in America were eaten not in the home, they were eaten in restaurants. So a lot of our food distribution system was hooking up food to restaurants. And it doesn't just easily, oh, this week we need to send it to grocery stores instead. It goes through a distribution network. Then there are, believe it or not, 2 different types of toilet paper that are manufactured differently, some for home and some for office. And they can't just manufacture them on different kinds of tubes, etc., because now people are consuming most of their toilet paper in their home and not their office. And it's not that we don't have enough food, it's that the hauling of it is starting to break down as well. Long distance haulers having to go across states where all the services for them are shut down. And given food shortages we will potentially face under climate change, we are well served to develop a strong local food network. So that is kind of my takeaway from this, is the highlighting of our need for local food networks that are less dependent on a distribution system that is very monopolized. Shock doctrine. So many of you are familiar with Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, and one of the things that she talks about in there is that the rich have had plans in place for decades about how to take advantage of crises as they're coming. They plan ahead for them, and they're in a good position to take advantage of them when they happen. Then we see things like bailouts going to the multinational companies, happened in 2008, happening again, not going to working people. The percentage of Congress people who are millionaires certainly does not help this situation. So what if we had a plan? What if we knew when crises were coming, what we want to see happen? What if the people took back Congress in November? So this is another important lesson for me out of this, is that the earth can heal itself. That image on the left side of the screen is the previous water, very polluted, hard to see. And in the right there is after the pandemic. In another image I saw that you could actually see the fish because the water was so clear. These are swans and also dolphins that have returned to the canals in Italy that had not been there for a long time. There's all kinds of dramatic stories being told about sea turtles coming up on shores they haven't felt safe to come up on and laying their eggs, and all kinds of signs of the earth healing right now. Another lesson, we have completely inadequate safety nets for those with less resources. And I put up there, you know, what other countries are doing, because I think it's important for us to realize that there are countries who are doing a much better job of responding to the suffering of their citizens. Protecting the working class. The lack of paid sick leave has actually spread this virus. Many people who don't have sick leave went to work even when they were sick, and that helped spread it. The lack of adequate wages leaves people who are who work hard all day vulnerable to any crisis that comes along, and that'll be true about climate change. It becomes much more obvious the essential value of the work that working class people are doing. The class gap has been just really painfully apparent. Some people are being able to work from home and are fairly unaffected, and then other people completely losing their jobs. One of my big learnings is no more political excuses. I will never again accept a politician saying that they can't do X for climate mitigation efforts because we can't move that fast, or we have decision-making and budget cycles we must follow. And I have, for years, working on divestment and on passing of ordinances, had exactly those things be said to me as reasons why nothing could happen in the year we were in. The truth is that if it's a crisis, we can do whatever we need to do, and I will no longer accept politicians saying climate disruption is not an emergency or a crisis. So how you frame things is everything. Now, these are 4 headlines here, and they are 4 headlines in different newspapers or magazines about the same study. They're reporting on the same study, and this is what Wayne was starting to allude to when I rudely cut him off. So the first headline says, coronavirus causing carbon emissions to fall, but not for long. The second one says, in the coronavirus pandemic, carbon emissions have fallen, but climate change remains an existential threat. The third one says, coronavirus could cause the first big emissions drop in a decade. And the last one says, coronavirus pandemic could lead to the biggest carbon emissions drop since World War II. Now you can see that if you just read those headlines, you would have a very different feeling about the same set of facts. So, you know, we've all heard of George Lakoff, his book, Don't Think of an Elephant, where he makes the argument that framing is everything. So this is a good example about framing. What the study that they're referencing actually says is it talks about how the carbon emissions have been falling off because of people being stuck in their homes. It says that the modeling predicts that we're going to have a 5% reduction, and that's, as it turns out, the biggest emissions drop since World War II. In the second article on this list, they quote somebody who very sort of negatively says, oh, well, yeah, we're getting reductions, but this is not the way you want to do it. Well, no kidding. But it's said sort of as if like this whole thing is of no importance because this is not how we want to do it. So one of the things that suggests to me is that as a movement, it's really important for us to hold up that this isn't a model for how to do it, but it is an indication that we can make big changes if we have to. And it's important for us to hold up what would the changes that need to happen be. The first article says, oh, but not for long, by pointing out that in 2008, there was also an emissions drop when the economy was down. And very rapidly, all of that drop was reversed and people went back to the same kind of spending habits that they had. And I think that's no surprise to any of us to know that, yes, things are going to go back to previous patterns unless we get something else in place. And so that's why the next section we're going to go to is going to talk about the climate mitigation plan, and in general, having a plan, having a vision for what changes could be. But I want to stop and let people comment or reflect on the previous section. So we've just gone through the section on lessons learned from it, which is a little different than silver linings. So any other comments people want to make about lessons learned?
Yeah, we've got a few people queued up here. Before we start, I want to say that some people have learned how to use the raise hand function. Roy says that if you look under the participants section, it's in the lower right. I don't have that on mine, so I think it might depend on how your Zoom is set up, but that is an option. I'm gonna have Lisa kick it off, and then I wanted to invite anybody who doesn't have their video up while she's talking. If you want to just unmute yourself, then you could go ahead and talk next. That would be a great way for me to be able to know that you'd like to chat. So go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, just real quick about the food distribution system. I had, I watched a news clip about the two different systems for restaurants and for markets, for groceries, and how farmers are just throwing the food away. Those that were just on the restaurant, the non-groceries distribution network. Yeah. I saw a video of dairy farmers just pouring milk down the drain, of farmers plowing under perfectly good fields of vegetables. Yeah. It just, I had to turn it off. I couldn't stand watching it, the waste of food. So that, just to your point about those two different food distribution systems and how that needs reform in a major way.
Yeah, and so, when we talk about what difference would it make to have planning going into climate change, it would be possible to plan for more flexibility of being able to switch things from one thing to another thing. But right now we don't have that kind of flexibility.
So,
great. Let's go ahead, Marilyn.
Oh, okay. Thank you kindly. What this makes me think of is, first of all, Lisa, I don't think anybody's throwing away, any farmers are plowing under food in Thurston County. In fact, this entire situation has accelerated plans to develop institutional buyers food hub and make that more available to local residents. There's been just a groundswell in interest in buying locally produced foods and also in starting gardens. So this is our window of opportunity. And this kind of goes back to something Lynn said at the beginning of tonight's event, which was that, there's, at least momentarily, that we seem to be more aware, or there's heightened focus on health disparities, inequities in our system that are becoming painfully obvious and are even worse now because of the crisis, because there is no safety net. But I do think that, just as with climate change, with the photograph that you showed of clearing water, clearing air, being able to see China's topography from the outer space, all these things are showing what is possible. What is possible at this time, and it's not going to be forever. People are not going to have this level of awareness or this sense of urgency about doing things. There will be a tendency to want to go back to normalcy and to be complacent and to not worry about these things. But now is the time to say, hey, look, let's raise our awareness, but also let's look at what can happen when we don't live in a certain way, and when we make decisions collectively, and when we have great leadership. All these things are showing us what is possible.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly why I'm doing this talk, actually, is I think we have to have a bright light. We have to really draw a circle around the things we want to learn from this and what we need to implement from this and what we need to do differently from this. Okay, I see that Barack is next.
Me tagging on to what Marilyn just said, I think part of the awareness is being aware of our history and what happened after the Great Depression with the New Deal, and how people's suffering was greatly alleviated by major investments in social and in service and infrastructure, and we can do that again. So I think that historical reminder it could be useful. The only other thing I wanted to mention is about the slide you showed about the species and how a lot of creatures are happy right now. And yes, I'm enjoying seeing that, like the jackals in Tel Aviv taking over the parks, and this video showed like a big howling of the jackals. It was so great. Anyway, but on another level, I'd be really cautious to talk about that with people because we really can't heal from the loss of species. Once the species goes extinct, it's gone forever. And we're we're seeing species extinction at 1 to 10,000 times the rate historically. So just something.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Brock, that we have to heal if we can from the place we're at now. We're not turning back the hands of the clock. We can't get back the species we've already lost. And we probably already have a lot of species so close to the brink that we won't be able to bring them back either. But it is, I think, noteworthy to see the signs of the earth trying to heal itself when we're out of its way. Okay.
Helen would like to say something, and then Wayne, and then we'll probably move on, I'm guessing, from there.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep it brief, but one thing that really I've been very concerned about is I think people will want to go back to the way things were, but it's not going to be possible because, as you mentioned, so many businesses are failing and so on. I mean, the economy can't go back to what it was. And a lot of people are going to be hurting for a very long time. And the great danger in that is a sense of nostalgia for how it was, that's kind of not real, that there's a sense of how it was where it was great when it really wasn't. So it's, and then I'm also a little nervous about there being sort of a political dichotomy created. I'd read some of the right-wing stuff, and I'm concerned that as we try to message about climate change and the possibilities of it, that we continue to be really careful about talking about the pain that this pandemic is causing to people economically and socially. Because if we don't link those messages and then say something positive about how we can be self-reliant and build and create resilience and become a healthy society, then we could easily go the other way.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, you are anticipating the next couple of sections here. We're headed towards the discussion of resilience. Okay, next comment.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Okay, that silver lining that's been mentioned about in terms of reduction of carbon dioxide emissions is not really, well, several of the others I've seen where you said 5%, and as you indicated, they're all over the map, but they are estimations. The best way to really tell the proof of the pudding is what is actually in the atmosphere. And there are observatories throughout the world that measure that hourly.
Right.
And I've been watching those, and there's been essentially no change. And so it's still going up at about 2.4 to 2.5 parts per million.
Really?
By comparison to the previous years and then average. So, and that's, it'd be interesting to see of April and May what happens. And then another thought being, well, we certainly have had reductions, but is it going to make any difference? Realize that to achieve not letting our temperature rise more than 1.5 or 2.0 degrees Celsius, that we're, well, the 1.5 that we'll be needing to reduce annually, like 7%. And so that 5%, maybe over 1 year, that's certainly not going to cut it. We're going to have to keep on going at that kind of rate or greater than that to really hit our goal of substantially less than 2.0
right.
Celsius.
Yes, no, I'm aware that 5% is not what we need, that we need 7%. And that was part of what I was trying to talk about in this last slide about framing is, you know, several of the authors of those articles were sort of essentially trying to dismiss this entire thing by saying, oh, well, you know, it's not really going to make a difference. But the idea that we have to really communicate to people is, no, this is not how you would go about achieving the kind of reductions we need to do. You wouldn't make everyone stay at home and not work, you know. You would instead have a climate mitigation plan that's much more widespread and goes into many more different areas, etc., which is what we'll talk about in a minute. Is there anybody else before we go into talking about the mitigation plan?
I don't see anybody else wanting to say anything right now. So.
Okay, so we'll go on to that. So many of you already know this, but I'm going to say it for those on here who don't. So we are trying to pass a climate mitigation plan in Thurston County. Our 3 cities in our county have committed to creating a plan that will reduce greenhouse gases by 45% by 2030 and by 85% by 2050. This is actually based on what the science tells us is necessary. It will require very difficult changes, but it's what we have to do to avoid the 1.5 Fahrenheit degree temperature rise, which Wayne was just talking about a moment ago, which is the level considered catastrophic for the planet. So it's courageous to try to make a plan that will actually follow the science. A lot of other communities have picked goals that they saw as achievable, but were lesser percentages and therefore not going to do what science says we have to do. So in our plan, buildings have been our biggest sector in Thurston County, but due to the passage of the Clean Fuels Act, it will be the second biggest sector because buildings will start using cleaner fuel in the future after that act goes fully into effect. So proposed items in the plan are the encouragement of more solar power, encouraging more efficiencies and net zero features in buildings. So efficiencies are kind of something that people don't talk about very much when they talk about change, and it's really hard for people to believe that efficiencies can make as much difference as they do, but they're actually considered to be the low-hanging fruit by most people who work in the building sector, because you can get huge amounts of change from just making the way our appliances and our electrical anything be more efficient. And then net zero buildings are buildings that are designed so that they conserve energy within them. So where your energy inputs and your energy outputs can kind of come to zero. The plan also calls to incentivize builders to use better building practices. So some of the stuff we were just talking about above. Incentivize landlords to increase energy efficiency in buildings, and encourage the movement from gas to electricity with a hopefully renewable energy grid. So right now, if we move from gas to electricity, we're still mostly moving from a dirty fossil fuel to a dirty fossil fuel. However, as we move to having more of our electricity provided by hydroelectric, by solar, by wind, and being able to hold that in grid capacity, then it means that the electricity that we would use in our homes would be clean. It wouldn't be creating greenhouse gases. And so we need to be building houses right now that don't build in a gas infrastructure, but build in an electric one. So as we switch over, it will be clean. Okay, next slide. Transportation will become our biggest sector in Thurston County once buildings decrease a little bit. Electric vehicles can be fueled off of a clean grid. So that's kind of the dream, is that if people had clean electricity in their homes, not necessarily your own solar panel, like if your electricity coming into your house was clean, then you could be charging your car off of that, and then your car would not be using fossil fuels. Particularly in Thurston County, because of some things about our geographic layout, public transportation is quite challenging in terms of greatly reducing cars on the road. So we do much better if we can see more and more people moving into EVs, more carpooling. The plan calls for more walking and biking infrastructure, more telecommuting, which we were just talking about, and 20-minute walkable neighborhoods, which means that there would be more things located within a 20-minute walk, so you could get to the essentials, the grocery store, the bank, the barber, etc., without having to get into your car. Other things under consideration in the plan: requiring all city departments to consider climate in every decision that they make. You really get very different outcomes when that's really built into city planning. Planting more trees as carbon sinks. We're hoping it's going to have some protecting of existing trees in there, since existing trees are bigger carbon sinks than new ones would be. Encouraging regenerative agriculture as a less greenhouse intensive way of farming. It's looking somewhat hopeful that that's going to make it into the plan. Campaigns to encourage changing our energy use behaviors, and then addressing the needs of vulnerable populations under climate change. If you want to help pass this plan, I encourage you to join Carbon Free Thurston, our action group that advocates on behalf of the plan. You can write me at my email address to find out about joining that group. I also encourage you to sign our pledge card, which just came out in today's newsletter. And if you go on our webpage, on the homepage, about 2/3 of the way down, you'll find the link to the pledge card. So there's a variety of things on the pledge card that you would be invited to do to help pass the plan. So how will this plan help us avoid a climate crisis? The pandemic has temporarily lowered greenhouse gases, as we were just talking about, mainly by drastically cutting driving and a lot of other economic activity in a way that's unsustainable. The plan would shift transportation footprints to renewable sources of fuel. It could encourage telecommuting, and it would encourage economic activity in green ways. So that's a very different thing. We could get that same kind of downshifting of our transportation footprint, but we could get it in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't ruin our economic life. The plan could create changes in how we use energy, both to build and to heat our homes, which of course is something that was not addressed at all by the pandemic. So the plan can help bring us some other ways of reducing that are not happening in this current circumstance. Encourage planning for climate issues in all of our urban development. Okay, before we go into this last section, which is more about how we can create change, I want to see if people had questions or comments about Thurston's Climate Mitigation Plan. So I think there's 2 hands up.
Yeah, I see that Helen would like to say something, and I haven't seen anyone else, but.
Well, I'm seeing something that says 3 people have their hands raised.
Oh, now they do. Great. How about Helen and then Roy and Barb?
This is partly a question, Lynn, and partly a comment. How much do you think that the current climate mitigation plan puts emphasis on new building? Because to me, it seems like there's a real before and after with the economic shift that we're looking at. And it seems to me that the plan now would be more successful if it really focused on finding ways to reduce carbon emissions with what we have now, you know, rather than building out of it. It seems like what we really need to do is other kinds of solutions that aren't about building out of the problem.
Yeah.
Because that building is probably not going to happen, at least not as people imagined it would.
Yeah.
So that seems really important. It puts more emphasis on green infrastructure ideas like the trees, because they grow themselves. It's cheaper,
right.
You know. So that's one thing. And then related to that,
can I respond to that part?
Yeah, sure.
So the plan is, I would say, pretty heavily focused on what happens with new buildings. I've been told by Chris Von Dahlen that the stats in the US show that in a 30-year period of time, buildings are replaced. So, which is surprisingly shorter than I would have thought it would be. But there are some things in the plan that also have to do with encouraging energy efficiencies. And so those would be things that would be encouraging retrofit kinds of things inside of existing buildings. So there is some of that there, probably not to the degree that we might wish. Okay, you want to go ahead with your second?
Now I'll just leave it and let other people go.
Okay.
Go ahead, Roy.
Lynn, when you were discussing some of your solutions on transportation, you sort of passed over public transportation pretty quickly, sort of dismissing it as not being a valuable thing to pursue in the climate mitigation plan.
I'm not dismissing it. I'm not dismissing it, but like if you think about the geography of our county, where we have the sound kind of pushing into the top of our county, it makes it really hard to have routes that are really efficient. You can't have diagonals because of that. And I mean, we've gone, I mean, it's an amazing model for other communities. We've gone to making our public transportation free, which is wonderful. And it has not that greatly increased ridership. We are still seeing buses that are running enough empty that when you do the math on it, they're actually more energy inefficient than having 4 people in a car would be, for example. And so that's why things like carpooling in our plan are actually more effective options. And I've always been a big proponent of public transportation, but I've learned a lot while I've been working on this plan about what the challenges are for Thurston County around public transportation. So I'm not saying there isn't anything good that we could do around public transportation. I'm just saying that the plan does not very heavily point to it, because it's pointing to things that are considered more effective for our county. this is different in other places.
All right. Go ahead, Barb.
Okay, I just want to call your attention to the newsletter that came out this afternoon. There's an article, well, Sam Merrill wrote an article about renewable energy and what's going to drive it. And, but also right below that, there's an article about advocating for renewable energy and energy efficiency in the mitigation plan. And there are links there. So what we're encouraging you to do is contact your elected officials and encourage them to have the items that are listed here, or if you have other items in the plan. This is a list of items that Lynn, I think mostly, and Chris put together of what we'd like to see in the plan. So I use their list. The buildings as Climate Action Group is meeting on the 23rd, so, or no, 21st. And the steering committee meeting of the TCMP is meeting on the 23rd, and they have a virtual option there as well. So I just want to call your attention to some of the ideas that we put together in today's newsletter. And next week, I have a volunteer who's going to write an article about transportation, and I will then include Lynn's talking points about transportation.
Great, thank you, Barb. That's really good to have that in front of people.
It looks like we're all good to move on. Anybody else want to say something right now?
Okay,
great.
So, being the change we want to see. I know that saying is a little overdone, but it seemed to cover what is going to be in this section. So, so glad we have Carrie on the call right now. So Carrie is about to launch what we're calling the Chrysalis Project, and this is one of the ways we're going to be trying to do outreach to the four city councils and the county council to bring before their attention our demand and desire for climate mitigation. People are going to be creating works of art that involve butterflies with their messages for the council people. So as more and more and more and more and more butterflies come their way, it will become very hard for them to not see that this is a distinct message about climate change. And one of the things that Carrie and I have been talking about is a fact that I just love about the reality of butterflies. So some of you may know this, and some of you, this will be new information. So butterflies, well, caterpillars, when they go into the chrysalis, kind of melt down, and there winds up being what's called a nutrient soup inside of the chrysalis. And the immune cells are sort of attacking this soup. And there are also what are called imaginal cells that are their DNA that is in there holding the vision for a butterfly coming out of this whole thing. And the imaginal cells eventually win out over the immune cells and then go on to create the butterfly. So I think this is an amazingly powerful image for what we as activists have to see as our job. It is our job to be holding the vision for what it is we want, and especially coming out of the soup we're in right now. And we are in a soup. I mean, you look at what is happening to our society under COVID, there is a total meltdown that's happening. And so it's really important that we be the people holding that vision. So I really want to encourage people to sign up. You do have to sign up to take place in Carrie's workshop, which is happening on Saturday, April 25th. And that link there is where you can go to sign up. Anything you want to add, Carrie, about this?
Just, you know, there are a couple people in this workshop, Kaylee and Brita, who are participating in that, who are high school students, and there's information in the newsletter that came out as well. And I think that, you know, the more diverse people that can join us for this workshop and help to spread the word about this, it has the potential to be pretty powerful. So I'd love to see any of you who are able to join us there.
Could you say more about the workshop itself and how long and so on?
Yeah, so I'm still finalizing the details, but I would say that it's going to be between about 45 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes, depending on if you are like really willing to sit and stay and do your artwork with the group or not.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think, yeah, it's a very inspiring project. I mean, we will be retaining copies of the butterflies, and I think Carrie's going to find some pretty powerful things to do with our copies of the butterflies. So, okay. How to build resilient communities in general. So, having real and robust safety networks for people are critical. Less economic disparity leaves less people hovering on the edge of disaster without resource to use in an emergency. It is predictable who will be hurt: coastal communities, farmers, poor people. Emergency planning for such groups could be done now. Better healthcare makes a more resilient population. Localized and regionalized food systems are less vulnerable to disruption. Education should be preparing us for new lifestyles and new solutions. And we are more resilient when we have multiple pathways available to us so that we can easily make changes and not be blocked. Pay for what matters. So I just am going to ask people to throw out your guesses that you have about what percent do you think we would have to increase our national budget in order to fix what is broken and prepare for climate change. So when I say fix what is broken, I mean fix all the damage that we have from the virus. Just throw out some figures. 10%, 15%, what do you think? 100%? Wow.
Yes, 10%.
I think more than a money figure, really have to change minds in terms of our political differences. That's the big difference. Other than that, if everyone were focused on it, then essentially it's just going to happen almost on its own, individually and through corporations and without that, without a coalescing of our essentially our split science and anti-science, that we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay, so I heard 10% from one person. Was someone else going to say a percent?
I was just going to say I think it's pretty darn low because I recall reading years ago that just eliminating our subsidies would which would be like, I don't know, it was like a couple percent of of our GNP would make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I opt for whatever lowest percentage you're offering as an option.
Okay.
Rock. I'll even say 1%.
Okay. Wow, you guys are very optimistic. I mean, I have felt like like so many things have been damaged. Like when I think about what it would take to support all those small businesses that are on the verge of bankruptcy, I think, oh, a lot of money. But anyway, let's see where I was going with this. So this might be a little small on some screens, but that blue part there is our defense budget. It's 57% of our budget is spent on the military. And by comparison, the yellow section, the larger yellow section, is health and human services. So like a lot of the stuff that we're probably needing right now to help recover, that's 7% right now. Up at the top, there's a little teeny sliver that's agriculture, that's 2%, and state money to the states is 3%. Clearly, the states are needing some money right now in order to help with the mess that we're in. HUD, 4%. So it seems pretty clear to me that if we just substantially reduced our defense budget, we would be able to pay for everything we need right now to fix the mess from the virus and also to do adequate planning for climate change. So in case anyone tells you it can't be done, it can be done. Okay, what actions we can take now and in the coming decade to protect us from climate disruption. So starting with family and friends who are living in the path of climate change. Talk to them about it now. And then for young people, are they choosing careers that will be part of the solution or careers that will continue an unsustainable pathway? Passage of local carbon mitigation plans and nationally the Green New Deal. So those are really big things that we could be doing that would make a difference. Support solutions that can build resiliency across our different systems. So, you know, we see what's happening to healthcare right now. We see what's happening to education right now. All of these, the food system, all these systems, as we look at them, we could start to think about what would make them more resilient, what would prepare them for what's coming with climate change. Redistributing financial resources in our society, that would be an obvious one. What could a radical Congress next year do for our overall picture? Supporting groups that help us deliberately make lifestyle choices rather than have prices force more drastic and irreversible changes. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. That actually got us through the whole thing. And just going to let people raise their hands and comment, share whatever thinking you want to share right now.
And there's a number of people we haven't heard from, so please, if you haven't had a chance to share,
let's go to Frank. We haven't heard from Frank. Frank, you're still muted.
Yeah, I can't see. Oh, there you go.
Okay. So I was wondering if any other communities around the country are coming up with mitigation plans like we are.
Yes, this of course varies a lot depending on, you know, red state, blue state sorts of things. Also, all mitigation plans are not equal. So many plans have been passed in various places around the country that are not going to get people there. You know, they're sort of a bunch of ideas on a piece of paper. One of the things that we're trying for in our plan, which I think does make it a better plan than a lot of plans, is we're trying to put benchmarks into it. And what it means to put benchmarks in means you say, okay, we're gonna have more buildings that are solar ready. Then you say, well, how many will we have by 10 years from now? How many will we have by 20 years from now? You make some targets to actually hit. And you know, that seems to be the way to be effective.
I've heard of a lot of good ideas from other communities, but I haven't heard of any community that's trying to do a comprehensive, you know, kind of enforceable, if you will, plan.
Well, the model nationally is actually Portland. So Portland has a benchmark plan, and Portland has been working on their plan for the last 15 years, and they are actually meeting their targets, and they're actually seeing a reduction of their greenhouse gases. So the benchmarking thing is really critical. That's what Portland has done that is different than what other communities have done. And so that's why we're trying to get ours to be benchmarked.
How about the state of Washington? Are there any comprehensive plans being developed around the state?
There are, you know, like Seattle has a plan. I think Seattle's plan sucks. I don't think it's going to get us anywhere. There's a coalition of people in King County, because there's lots of cities in King County besides Seattle, that is also working on getting mitigation plans passed for all of the, I think it's 17 communities that are part of that. that effort. So there are people working on it. I mean, I have a friend who lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who's busy working on their city councils about to pass their plan. So, you know, there are people working on this around the country. But, you know, we have to just work in our own little, you know, where we have to do this work locally. And as discouraging as it is that Trump took us out of the Paris Agreement, if we were in the Paris Agreement, the things that would be coming down from that would be things that would need to be implemented on the local level. So while we can't work things on the national level, it's even more important that we're working them from the bottom up like this. Okay, I'm going to call on another person. I heard a voice.
It was Marilyn.
Ah.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Thank you. So, you know, in the public health world, we love having these great plans, and I totally agree with you about the whole benchmarking thing. I'm glad you mentioned Portland. I'm glad to know that there is a model that has a 15-year track record we can look at. But I know that like in the state level and national level, well, state level public health, you know, there's a lot of demonstration projects that actually are like little trials for how to move the plan forward. Now, I know that the Thurston County plan isn't finished, but I'm wondering whether, you know, some cross-sector agency, you know, public nonprofit initiatives that were funded that focused on doing some of the things that will require money, that will require collaboration in order to move the plan forward, have been discussed, and you know what your thoughts are about that, because I know, you know, TCAT has a certain role and can't do everything, but you certainly could advocate for, you know, a kind of cross-sector demonstration project or either intervention project that could actually begin to implement some of these ideas that are discussed in the mitigation plan. We don't have to wait until the mitigation plan is over in order to start looking for funding to do that.
Right.
And there are plenty of nonprofit organizations. I just saw Robert Wood Johnson had a big call for proposals for community initiatives today. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, TCAT has been lobbying the city councils for a while now, saying, you know, what early actions can you do? What can you start doing now before the plan passes? Let's not let this period of time while we're developing it be a wasted period of time. And, you know, of course, there are other agencies and other nonprofits that are working on developing this little part or that little part, and so some of those will hopefully be you know, really right there ready to go at the start line. So some examples is the conservation district has been working on developing how would they teach farmers about regenerative agriculture, and then luckily in this last session the legislature passed a regenerative bill, which I believe is going to bring some funding to the conservation district to actually do that. So that's a good example. And I think locally, Chris Von Dalen's organization has been working on a buildings challenge, which they're going to roll out later this year, encouraging builders to sort of compete on creating some model buildings that will hold up examples for us of what can happen in the building sector that will be fossil fuel friendly, that will, you know, get us off of fossil fuels. So, you know, there are things like that that people are doing, and the plan, I think, will help empower some of those things to just be taken seriously or get funding or, you know, help move them forward. Wayne? You're still muted.
There, now I'm on mute. I'm just wondering, I'm curious about whether, I've not seen anything in the regional plan council meetings of the advisory or the steering group, any talking yet about the quantitative measurements in terms of each of these goals. I hope that's going to be coming starting this next Thursday.
Yep.
The thought I'm thinking of, some of those should be fairly easy to measure in terms of looking year by year of like number of solar installations done, or a number of electric vehicles registered in the county, and then by each of the cities compared to the previous year, or every 5-year point in terms of looking out to 2045. Seems like some of these bigger ones that can be quantitatively measured, but hadn't seen anything about that yet. One of the concerns is that as a lot of plans, a lot of organizations end up being put on the shelf and ignored once they're completed. The Thurston Climate Adaptation Plan of the previous one of 10 years ago had a goal of by 2020 at certain targets, and I heard nothing whatsoever about, or not that I wasn't around then, but the thought of was there anything quantitatively done in terms of that plan other than being put on the shelf by different cities and the county?
Yeah, I can't comment on the adaptation plan. That's kind of before my time, but I was going to comment on the first part of your question.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess.
Oh, you were asking about things being quantified. Yeah. So where they're at with the mitigation plan right now is the consultant has been trying to look at the things that are being selected, and he's trying to put some numbers on what he thinks, if we did this one, how much reduction would it bring? If we did this one, how much reduction would it bring? So he's mainly right now just trying to quantify, can we get to that 45% reduction by 2030? Can we get to that 85% reduction by 2050? So that's the part he's looking at now. And then the next thing after that would be then to put the benchmarking in of like what level of this or that would have to happen in order to go there. So I believe on Thursday he will be revealing some quantitative analysis, and then there will be a public feedback period of time where us and the public get to say what we think about the plan as it's going forward.
Mm-hmm. And then whether the cities will end up agreeing to it and the county.
Yeah, I see Barack has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say I think what Wayne said is really well taken, and it means that we really have to continue to be diligent, in years to come. I remember when the only high school students presented the 2 resolutions that were adopted at Olympia City Council, and one of the council members, I forget who, made a kind of a dry, comment, about how, well, let's hope that, we actually, enact these resolutions as stated, not like what happened to previous resolutions. And
yeah,
so,
it's very clear to me that we are just gonna, once I was thinking, the hurdle was to get it passed, and it's come very clear to me this week that the hurdle will actually be holding their feet to it once they pass it. So, yeah, Lisa?
Roy also had his hand up too.
Okay.
Either one.
I'll just make it real quick.
Yeah.
The steering committee meeting I attended with you, Lynn, and I think Wayne, you were there too. I was very encouraged to hear Lisa Parsley, an Olympia City Council member, recommend that the steering committee not be sunsetted, that they continue to meet indefinitely, even after the plan is passed, so they can keep working on it and making necessary adaptations. I thought that was a great suggestion, and I hope that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Roy? Can you unmute, Roy?
Yes. My understanding is the mitigation plan draft will be hopefully ready in June. That may not happen. I attended a meeting of the Thurston Thrives Clean Energy and Climate Work Team today. And we are looking at ways of making recommendations for how the mitigation plan should be implemented and followed up. It could include steering committee, it could include other groups, but it's the high priority on our agenda, so it won't be forgotten.
Good.
I just wanted to also just throw out there, just invite any of the youth present to share anything, if any comments or thoughts that came up during this workshop. And no is an okay answer. If so, you need to unmute yourself.
I thought this was super helpful. It was really interesting. I had a lot of the similar ideas that Lynn had and that Lynn mentioned, and I thought it was really cool just looking at especially the silver lining part. And along the pass or fail thing, I really wished we had a pass or fail, but unfortunately our school didn't, which is really sad. But yeah, there are a lot of environmental benefits to less transportation, and I just thought it was really interesting to see all the connections, and especially also how the media treats COVID-19 compared to climate change. I thought that was really important to notice, and so thank you for presenting everything.
Oh, you're welcome. As you start to look at colleges, you could keep in mind that there are some ungraded ones.
Who just spoke?
That was Kaylee Shen. She's a student at Olympia High School.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking to see if anybody else has something they want to say before we call it a good evening. Wayne?
Lynn, tremendous job. I have really enjoyed this. I think we covered a lot of territory, and thanks for doing a super job. All of you, and I really appreciate everybody's inputs. That was really, really good tonight. Thank you.
And Patricia, did you want to say something?
Not really.
Okay, I
was waving goodbye, and I appreciated it too. I thought it was excellent because I've been enjoying my time on the beach, walking and bicycling and getting more exercise than usual. It's been wonderful.
Well, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evening to come join us, and also for how much you really participated. I feel like it really did make it a discussion, which is what I was hoping for. And this is recorded, so we will figure out how to make that available, probably somehow on our website. And so if you want to encourage somebody else to listen to it, then it'll be available for them to listen to. So
Lynn, before we say goodnight, I just wanted to say thank you very much, but I also wanted to thank each and every one of the participants. I see some new faces, but also some old friends here, and I so appreciate the knowledgeable and thoughtful comments that they shared. I learned a lot from everyone.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.